The stagecoach rolled into Willow Creek just as the sun began to sink behind the Wyoming hills, turning the dust in the air into a golden haze. Carrick Montgomery stood waiting on the wooden platform outside the station, tall and broad-shouldered, his black hat pulled low over eyes that had learned to study the horizon for trouble. For 5 years he had built his ranch alone. For 5 years he had eaten his meals in silence, worked the land in silence, and gone to sleep in silence. Today that silence was supposed to end. The coach wheels rattled to a stop. The horses snorted. The driver climbed down and stretched his back before glancing at Carrick with a knowing look. "Your mail-order bride's inside," he said. "Hasn't spoken a word since Cheyenne." Carrick's throat went dry. He had read her letters more times than he cared to admit. Born Miss Amelia Foster, 22 years old, a schoolteacher from Boston, her handwriting had been neat and confident, her words thoughtful. She had written about wanting a fresh start, about being practical and unafraid of hard work. She had not written about fear. The stagecoach door creaked open. A small gloved hand appeared first, then the hem of a dusty blue dress. She stepped down slowly, almost as if her boots were made of stone. A bonnet shaded her face. Then she looked up. Carrick forgot every greeting he had practiced. Her face was wet with tears, not polite tears, not delicate ones. Her blue eyes were swollen and red. Her cheeks were streaked, her lips trembling as though she were fighting to hold herself together in front of strangers. She clutched a small valise against her chest like it was the only solid thing left in her world. This was not what he had expected. Carrick removed his hat. "Miss Foster." She nodded once. "I'm Carrick Montgomery." He held out his hand. She placed hers in his, but it felt fragile, uncertain. She could not meet his eyes for more than a second before fresh tears spilled down again. "I apologize," she whispered. "This is not how I meant to arrive." People nearby had begun to stare. Willow Creek was small. Nothing went unnoticed. Carrick stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to pretend with me." Her head lifted slightly. "Whatever's troubling you," he continued quietly, "there's no need to force a smile on my account." For a moment, something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe even relief. "I fear I've made a terrible mistake," she said. Carrick's stomach tightened. He had heard stories of mail-order brides who took one look at their future husbands and fled on the next eastbound coach. "Is it me?" he asked plainly. Her eyes widened. "No, no, Mr. Montgomery, it's not you." "Then let's speak somewhere private." He collected her trunk and led her to his wagon. She climbed up stiffly, holding her valise in her lap as though she expected someone to snatch it away. He snapped the reins gently, and the horses pulled them down the dusty road out of town. Willow Creek was small, a general store, a saloon, a church, a handful of homes. She studied everything with quiet alarm. Once they were clear of town and the prairie stretched wide and open around them, she finally spoke. I was not entirely honest in my letters." Carrick kept his eyes forward. "About what?" "I was a schoolteacher. That part was true." Her fingers twisted the handkerchief he had given her. "But I did not leave voluntarily." The wind moved through the tall grass, bending it like waves. The headmaster's son made certain advances, she continued, her voice steadier now. When I refused him, he accused me instead, said I behaved improperly. No. His father believed him. Carrick's jaw tightened. My reputation was destroyed, she said. No school would hire me. No family would receive me. In Boston, rumors travel faster than truth. She stared straight ahead. I did not tell you because I feared you would not want a ruined woman. Carrick slowed the wagon as his ranch came into view. The two-story house stood solid against the sky, smoke curling from the chimney, corrals, a barn, and 60 head of cattle grazing across land he had fought for. Miss Foster, he said, out here, a person is judged by what they do, not by what others whisper. She looked at him carefully. I advertised for a wife because I'm tired of facing this land alone, he went on. What matters to me is whether you meant what you wrote, that you want partnership, and that you're willing to build something real. She studied the ranch in silence. I was truthful about that, she said. I want a new beginning. I am not afraid of work. The wagon stopped in front of the house. A red dog bounded forward, barking happily. That's Rusty, Carrick said. He means well. She gave the smallest, trembling smile as the dog sniffed her glove. Inside, he showed her the house. It was plain but clean. He had scrubbed every surface himself. Fresh curtains hung at the windows. Wildflowers rested in a small vase upstairs in the room he had prepared for her. We are not married yet, he said carefully. The preacher comes Sunday. Until then, you'll have your own room. Relief washed over her face. Thank you, she breathed. That night she cooked supper. Though she had traveled for days, they ate quietly at first. Then, slowly, conversation found its footing. He told her about the ranch. She asked questions that showed she understood numbers, planning, growth. Later, as lightning flickered outside during a passing storm, Carrick placed a folded paper on the table. If we marry, he said, half of this land becomes yours. She stared at the deed in disbelief. In Boston, she said softly, married women own nothing. Out here, he replied, my wife will be my partner. That night, alone in her room, Amelia stood by the window and looked at the Wyoming stars. They stretched endlessly across the sky, brighter than anything she had ever seen back east. She had arrived in tears, convinced she had ruined her life. But downstairs was a man who had not asked her to smile for him, a man who had not judged her past, a man who had offered partnership instead of control. In the quiet of the prairie night, Amelia Foster realized something unexpected. For the first time since the scandal, she did not feel ashamed. She felt seen. The next morning, Amelia woke before sunrise. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed felt unfamiliar, the silence too deep. There were no carriage wheels outside, no distant church bells, and no neighbors arguing through thin city walls. Only the sound of wind brushing across open land. Then she remembered Wyoming, Willow Creek, Carrick Montgomery, her husband-to-be. She dressed quickly in a simple brown work dress and pinned up her hair. When she stepped downstairs, she expected to find him waiting, perhaps regretting his decision already. Instead, the kitchen was empty. A note rested on the table in steady handwriting. Gone to check the north pasture. Coffee on the stove. Take your time, CM. She stood still for a long moment. No demands, no pressure, no cold distance. Take your time. Something about that small kindness eased the tightness in her chest. She poured herself coffee and stepped outside. The prairie stretched endlessly under soft morning light. Cattle grazed peacefully, but the ranch buildings looked stronger in daylight than they had the evening before. This was not a reckless man's dream. This was something built slowly, carefully. She rolled up her sleeves. If she was going to stay, she would not be a guest. By mid-morning, she had swept the floors again, reorganized the pantry, and started fresh bread rising near the stove. She found satisfaction in the work. Order calmed her. When she heard a horse approaching, she wiped her hands quickly and glanced into the small mirror by the door, brushing flour from her cheek. Carrick entered, removing his hat. The smell of baking stopped him. "You've been busy," he said, looking around at the gleaming shelves and neat table. "I hope you don't mind," she replied carefully. He shook his head. "Mind? But it hasn't looked this cared for since my mother visited 3 years ago." There was something in his voice when he said, "Mother, are your parents still living?" She asked gently. He paused. "No. Father died after the war. Mother in 1870. I'm sorry." He nodded once, accepting the sympathy without ceremony. They ate breakfast together more comfortably than the night before. The quiet between them no longer felt strained. Afterward, he said, "I should show you the ranch. A woman ought to know what she's agreeing to." They walked side by side across the land. Rusty ran ahead, chasing grasshoppers. Carrick pointed out fence lines, water sources, grazing rotations. He spoke with pride, but not arrogance. He knew every inch of that land. Amelia listened closely. "You built all this alone?" she asked. "Mostly," he answered. "Who had help raising the frame of the house? Everything else I saved for." She saw it clearly now. This was not just property. It was 5 years of sweat and stubborn hope. At the corral, he introduced her to the horses. A calm Palomino mare stepped forward. "She's yours if you decide to stay," he said. "Her name's Daisy." Amelia smiled faintly and stroked the horse's neck. "What makes you think I cannot ride?" He looked surprised. "I spent summers on my grandfather's farm," she said. "I can sit a horse." A real smile broke across his face. It softened him completely. "Seems there's more to you than your tears," he said. They held each other's gaze a second too long before both looking away. That afternoon, dark clouds rolled in from the west. A storm swept across the prairie, trapping them inside. Rain drummed against the roof. The lightning flashed through the windows. Carrick lit a fire. He brought out his account books and showed her the ranch finances without hesitation. Income, expenses, plans for expansion. "You trust me with this?" she asked. "If we marry, it will be yours too." No man in Boston had ever spoken to her like that. As the storm continued, she found herself telling him about her students. The shy boy who loved arithmetic, the girl who hid novels inside geography books, the way children's faces lit up when they understood something new. "You miss teaching," he observed. "I do." He leaned back in his chair. "Willow Creek's growing. They'll need a school soon." She looked at him in surprise. "You would not object?" "Why would I?" he replied. "If it makes you happy." The words settled deeply inside her. By evening, the storm had passed and the prairie smelled clean. They prepared supper together, moving around each other in a rhythm that felt almost natural. After the meal, Carrick grew quiet. "There's something you should know," he said. She waited. "I was engaged once before the war." He stared into the fire. "When I came home, I wasn't the same man. She wanted who I had been, not who I became." Amelia understood more than he realized. People often loved an idea of someone, not the truth. "That's why you came west," she said softly. He nodded. "I wanted someone who would accept me as I am now, not compare me to a ghost." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. "I would never measure you against another man," she said. "I know too well how that feels." For the first time, their shared pain did not feel like weakness. It felt like understanding. That Saturday passed in preparations. She rode into town with him to meet the seamstress. The townspeople greeted Carrick warmly. She noticed how they respected him, how they trusted him. At the church, she stood quietly, imagining herself walking down the aisle. Sunday morning came clear and bright. As she dressed in her simple blue wedding gown, she studied her reflection. She was no longer the woman who had stepped off that stagecoach, trembling. There was still fear, but there was also something else, choice. Carrick waited downstairs in his best suit. When he saw her, his breath caught. "You look beautiful," he said. They rode to the church together. The ceremony was simple, honest vows spoken without flourish. When he kissed her, it was gentle and careful, as if he feared breaking something fragile. But she did not feel fragile. She felt steady. That evening, when they returned to the ranch as husband and wife, Carrick carried her over the threshold with a shy smile. "Tradition," he explained. Inside, he hesitated. "I don't expect anything tonight," he said. "Not until you're ready." She placed her hand against his chest. "I am your wife," she said quietly, "and I trust you." Trust, that was the difference. Not fear, not duty, not obligation. Trust. Later, as she lay in his arms in the quiet darkness, she realized something that startled her. She had not made a mistake. She had chosen. And this time, no one had forced her. "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know." The first weeks of marriage did not feel strange. They felt steady. Amelia woke before sunrise most mornings now. The Wyoming sky painted soft pink beyond the bedroom window. Carrick was usually already up, pulling on his boots quietly so he would not disturb her. But more often than not, she rose with him. Ranch life did not wait for romance. It demanded work. She learned quickly, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, churning butter from Bessie's milk, tending the small vegetable garden behind the house. At first, her hands blistered, her back ached, but she never complained. Carrick watched her carefully, always ready to step in. "You don't have to prove anything," he told her one evening when he caught her hauling a bucket heavier than she should. "I am not proving," she replied gently. "I am building." That answer stayed with him. Evenings became their favorite time. They would sit on the porch while Rusty rested at their feet. The prairie stretched wide and gold before them. Sometimes Carrick read aloud from one of his books. Sometimes they spoke of nothing important at all. There was no pretending between them. One afternoon, 2 weeks after their wedding, a letter arrived from Boston. Amelia opened it alone on the porch. When Carrick returned from the barn, he saw her wiping tears. "Bad news?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "My sister is engaged." "That is good news." "It is," she said, "but she writes that my scandal has already been forgotten. A new one has taken its place. A banker who stole money. That is all anyone talks about now." She looked out across the land. "My whole life was shattered. My name dragged through dirt, and now it means nothing to them." Carrick sat beside her. "It means something," he said. "It brought you here." She turned to look at him. If she had not been ruined in Boston, she would never have answered his advertisement. She would never have stood on this porch, never have felt this quiet strength beside her. Slowly, her tears faded. Summer passed into early fall. The town council approved the building of a schoolhouse. They approached Amelia one afternoon at the general store. "We hear you were a teacher back east," Mayor Thompson said. "Willow Creek could use one." She hesitated. Teaching meant time away from the ranch. Carrick spoke before she could. "If Amelia wants to teach, she will," he said simply. That night she studied him across the dinner table. "You truly would not mind?" He set down his fork. "Now you are not just my wife. You are your own person. I married you for partnership, not silence." The next month, Willow Creek School opened in a converted storefront. 15 children filled the small room. Amelia stood at the front, heart pounding, and felt something awaken inside her again. She was not a ruined woman. She was needed. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed the prairie. The wind howled across open land, rattling shutters and freezing water buckets solid. One night during a fierce storm, Carrick tied ropes between the house and barn so they would not lose their way in the whiteout. Amelia insisted on helping. Inside, they sat by the fire while the wind roared outside. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Regret what? Sending for a mail-order bride?" He looked at her steadily. Never." She studied his face, searching for doubt. "I feared you might," she admitted. When I arrived in tears, Carrick reached for her hand. "That was the moment I knew you were honest," he said. "You could have smiled. You could have lied. You did not." The firelight reflected in his eyes. "I would rather build a life with truth than comfort myself with a performance." Those words settled into her heart. Spring brought new calves and longer days. The ranch flourished. Amelia balanced teaching and home with quiet strength. Then, one evening beside the creek, she took Carrick's hand and placed it gently against her stomach. "There is something I must tell you." His face tightened with worry. "We are going to have a child." For a moment he said nothing. Then he lifted her into the air and laughed, the sound echoing across the open land. "Careful," she protested, smiling through tears. He set her down immediately, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I never thought I would have this," he said quietly. "Not after everything." "Nor I," she replied. Through summer, he became even more protective. He reduced her school days, hired extra help for the ranch, built a cradle with his own hands, sanding every edge smooth. When autumn returned, their son arrived on a clear October morning. Carrick never left her side during the long night of labor. When the baby's cry filled the room, he bowed his head as if in prayer. They named him James. That winter, Amelia stood once more on the porch as snow fell softly across their land. She remembered stepping off that stagecoach a year before, convinced she had ruined her life. Carrick stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You ever wonder?" he asked softly. "What would have happened if you had arrived smiling that day?" She leaned back against him. "I might have pretended for months," she said. "I might have tried to be what I thought you wanted. And I might have kept my own truths hidden," he admitted. She turned in his arms. "Then I suppose my tears were a blessing." He kissed her gently. "You never have to pretend with me," he said again, the same words he had spoken the day they met. Inside, their son stirred and began to cry. Amelia smiled. "I think he disagrees about pretending," she said softly. Carrick laughed and reached for the door. The prairie outside lay silent under fresh snow. Inside, the fire burned warm, and the house that had once belonged to a lonely rancher now held something far greater than partnership. It held love, a mail-order bride who had arrived in tears, a cowboy who had offered understanding instead of judgment, and a life built not on reputation or rumor, but on truth spoken plainly beneath the wide Wyoming sky.